On November 13, 1940, the Soviet submarine D-1 Decembrist occupied the designated training ground number 6 in Motovsky Bay to carry out a training mission. The crew had to conduct a training torpedo attack on the ship. 7 miles from the coast, the boat sank to rescope depth. Its dive was monitored by shore observers. Half an hour later, the submarine was seen and identified by border guards stationed at Cape Sharapov. After which D-1 literally disappeared before everyone's eyes. The crew did not contact at the appointed time and did not return to base. Ships of the Northern Fleet were sent to search for the submarine, and until the morning they unsuccessfully tried to find the missing submariners. In the morning, 2 seaplanes took off and inspected Motovsky Bay and its coasts, but to no avail. The military was struck by the submarine, which disappeared without a trace literally in front of 2 guard posts. At that time, Motovsky Bay was a closed area. The German base Basis Nord was located nearby. Half of the coastline was inaccessible to Soviet sailors. They were forbidden to enter several squares. Even then, it was believed that the disappearance of the submarine was connected with a secret German base. At the end of 1940, D-1 was expelled from the Northern Fleet, 55 sailors were declared dead. And with the start of the war, they completely forgot. And now, 78 years later, sensational news appeared. Submarine D-1 Decembrist found. In 1925, a decision was made to build new submarines for the Navy. The team of the Leningrad Technical Bureau, under the leadership of engineer Alinin, developed a design for the D-1 submarine, which was laid down at the Baltic Shipyard No. 189 in Leningrad. And in November 1928 it was launched. After which it became part of the Baltic Fleet. In 1933, D-1, as part of a special-purpose expedition under the command of Red Commander Tikhonov, made the transition along the White Sea-Baltic Canal, which was under construction. As part of the submarine brigades of the Northern Fleet, D-1 made a long voyage to the White Sea to New Land and the North Cape. On November 13, 1940, the submarine underwent a combat training course. It entered Motovsky Bay to carry out a training torpedo attack. Ship D-1 sank to periscope depth. The discovery of the submarine was observed from the shore. Half an hour later, the submarine was spotted by coastal observers at Cape Sharapov. D-1 went in the direction of the fishing peninsula. Observers saw her submerge underwater. At 1840 the submarine commander did not get in touch. In the evening, D-1 did not return to base. At night, a large-scale search began in Motovsky Bay for the missing submarine, in which the destroyer Stremitelny, the patrol ship Tumen, hunter boats, and the submarine K-1 took part. Until the morning, Motovsky Bay was monitored by noise suppressors, but it was all in vain. In the morning, 2 seaplanes set off to search for the missing submarine. They found an oil slick, wooden debris and fragments of an insulating plug in the Sharapov Cape area. Then the first assumption was made that D-1 sank at great depths. On the next day of searching, 2 miles from the island of Bolshoyarsky, the bottom line of one of the minesweepers broke. The equipment showed that at a depth on the ground there was a large unknown metal object, and another metal object was discovered 1.5 miles from Cape Vivnivolok. The Navy command stopped the search and voiced the version that the submarine died as a result of a sudden loss of buoyancy, which occurred due to a leak in one of the tanks. In the report on the death of D-1, they said the following. The submarine has passed the maximum depth of the hull strength. At about 120 meters it lost its seal and hit the ground with great force. People's Commissar of the Navy Kuznetsov explained this by the confusion of the crew and the belated actions of the commander to take measures to keep D-1 from falling. The appointed commander of the Northern Fleet in 1940, Arseny Grigorievich Golovko, disagreed with these versions. He denied the accusations against the crew of the submarine, which were brought forward by the People's Commissar of the Navy Kuznetsov. In the spring of 1941, under the leadership of Golovko, the search for the missing submarine began again, the commander of the Northern Fleet assumed that the submarine sank near the island of Bolshoy-Arsky, or at the cape which was located nearby. And the depth in these places was not critical for D1. The search operation had to be returned, and the war began. The submarine was also excluded from the Northern Fleet. 55 people were declared dead, and soon this tragedy was completely forgotten. So, let's go back to the beginning of the story. D1 sank to periscope depth, not far from Cape Vivnovolok. It was clearly seen by shore observers, half an hour later, and according to other sources, after 15 minutes, shore observers at Cape Sharapov saw it under the boat. Could D1 have covered this distance in such a time, and could coastal observers at Cape Sharapov have seen not D1, but another alien submarine? The commander of the Northern Fleet, Arseny Golovko, who did not believe in the official cause of the death of D1, many years later published a book called Together with the Fleet, which mentioned an unofficial version, and allegedly there was an alien submarine in the bay that torpedoed a Soviet submarine. Version number 1, English trace. For the British, the German secret base on the Kola Peninsula became a real headache. Thanks to Basis Nord, it became easier for the Germans to hunt ships from the countries of the British Union. The British had to cover all merchant ships with warships, and besides, a lot of effort and money was spent on searching and hunting for German ships and submarines. In 1940, with the assistance of the Soviet Union, the German auxiliary cruiser Komet sailed along the Northern Sea route from the North Sea to the Bering Strait and further to the Pacific Ocean. The German cruiser was disguised as the Soviet icebreaker steamer Semyon Desnaya, and on November 2, 1940, an article appeared in the British press about escorting a German submarine through the Northern Sea route. British intelligence could have mistaken the Soviet submarine D1 for a German submarine from Basis Nord, which the German Navy was preparing for military operations in the Pacific Ocean. The British knew Motovsky Bay well. In the 1930s, British warships guarding their fishing vessels in the Barents Sea entered Motovsky Bay to take shelter from bad weather and replenish fresh water supplies. And in August 1937, an English submarine surfaced in Catherine's Harbour in front of the surprised sailors. Later Soviet intelligence would find out that the British submarine was landing a reconnaissance group on the Murmansk coast. Therefore, the appearance of an English submarine in Motovsky Bay on November 13, 1940 could well have happened. Perhaps then a fatal meeting took place in the Soviet submarine D1 with a British hunter, who torpedoed the Soviet submarine, mistaking it for a German submarine. The British did not know that at that time the Soviet leadership had terminated all agreements with the Germans regarding the Nord base. Version number 2, Kriegsmarine. After the capture of Norway, the Germans had access to the North Sea and the North Atlantic. The need for the Nord base, located on the Kola Peninsula, gradually disappeared. Moreover, the Soviet leadership revoked all previous agreements regarding this base. In September 1940, the Germans decided to liquidate the base and evacuate all equipment. To ensure secrecy, it was decided to carry out the evacuation in November at night. The approaching polar night gradually reduces daylight hours. In the dark, German ships could mistake a Soviet submarine on the surface for a British submarine. D1 was very similar to the English Proteus-class submarine. It was difficult to distinguish them even during the day. It cannot be ruled out that D1 was attacked by the German fleet, which was ensuring the evacuation of property from the Snort base. Version number 3, Random Encounter. Earlier I mentioned that during the search for the missing submarine 2 miles from the island of Bolshoy-Arskia, the bottom cable of one of the minesweepers broke. The equipment showed that at a depth on the ground there was a large unknown metal object. Another metal object was found 1.5 miles from Cape Inovolok. According to some experts, one of these metal objects could be an English submarine or a German ship, which could accidentally collide with the Soviet submarine D1 and sink. The Soviet submarine also sank from the damage received. In 2018, 78 years later, sensational news was heard in the media. The missing submarine D1 Decembrist Nadina, specialists of the Northern Fleet discovered it in Motovsky Bay. With the help of special devices, a memorial plaque with the name of the boat and the name list of the crew was installed on the hull of the sunken submarine. Despite the fact that photos and videos of the sunken submarine were taken with the help of uninhabited vehicles and an analysis of the damage was carried out, photos and videos of the submarine's hull were not provided to the public, and the results of the examination of the supposed death of D1 were not reported either.